The CIA's final remote view, the psychic map to Earth's extinction. The word circled on the final page wasn't save. It was Cull. By the time the analysts saw it, the map was already on the table, coastlines withdrawn like a breath, inland lines thickened into corridors, and a column titled Acceptable Survivability Floor. A CIA remote viewer had traced a near-future extinction scenario, and someone decided it wasn't a vision, it was a plan. Here's what we can point to without flinching: a declassified session summary with a date that lines up with a sudden wobble in magnetic models, and routing slips that pushed a sketch into policy talk. Meanwhile, deep sights were tuned, rail trunks hardened, manifests drafted with names you'll never see. Who makes the cut? Who gets locked out? The criteria read like math, but the math lands on people. And the word that turned a warning into doctrine, Cull, didn't start as policy. To see how it became one, we need to go back to the program's last months, when a routine tasking order went sideways. The Contamination, how a vision became a plan. Stargate carried a simple label: explore anomalous cognition to support intelligence work. Officially, it was contested but occasionally useful. That was the line: keep it in the toolbox when you're blind, then put it away. In practice, operators lived in a gray zone. If a viewer sketched a thing that later showed up on a satellite image, nobody argued method. They sent the truck. In those final months, the tasking read like background noise. Industrial sites, personnel checks, a missing crate. Buried halfway down was a redirect. Characterized geomagnetic anomaly mapping. Operational relevance undetermined. It looked like a science deeder. It wasn't. It landed on the desk of a viewer with a reliability score people respected. Consistent Q discipline. A handful of operational hits that forced skeptical analysts to write retain pending. They'd worked simple before: describe a room, sketch a shipyard crane, call out water, stone, lattice. This queue went wide. The first minutes were messy, swirls, pressure, a recurring sense of tilt. The transcript shows the viewer anchoring. Find the map. Then the graphite settled into lines, coasts drawn not as they are, but as if the sea had stepped forward 2, maybe 3 lines inland. The hand tightened around elevated ridges like vertebrae. Corridors appeared, narrow strands through the interior labeled survivability corridors. In the margins, exclusion zones, with hash marks over major coastal cities and low-lying deltas. A few inland basins got crosshatched too. The word flow repeated. Then a pause, a heavy underline, and next to a parenthetical, herd movement, the single word: Cull. On first read, the analysts did what good analysts do: split raw from interpretation. They flagged corridor and exclusion as hypothesis. They wrote the caveat: viewer bias likely, disaster schema contamination, geophysics outside training. They tagged it low confidence and moved on. Except 2 things happened fast. First, the chain of custody. The session ID got routed to a unit that red flags anything low probability / high impact. The routing slip carries retain pending, bureaucratic for don't toss this, because if it's right and we ignored it, we're toast. Second, a separate contractor tasked a second viewer blind. Their map rhymed: inland corridors aligned with rail trunks, a bias toward deep rock, a note about non-coastal hubs, triage imperative. The overlays weren't perfect, but they were uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the viewer's reliability record kept the file from the shredder. They'd sketched a Middle East warehouse layout close enough to cue a search. They'd called out a communications relay in southern Europe that later matched a photo. Even skeptics wrote, operationally useful if triangulated. That phrase kept the door open. How did graphite lines start to bleed into planning? Not with a trumpet, through annotations. An analyst's margin scribble, a line with rail grid, deep rock, non-coastal hubs. Not orders, just breadcrumbs that made sense if you were hedging against storms, grid failures, evacuation choke points. A senior reviewed the packet and added 1 line to the cover memo. Scenario set Delta 3, maintain in black book. Once a thing gets a scenario label, it gets a seat in tabletop drills. Pushback came. A science advisor wrote the expected critique. Remote viewing sits outside replicable science. Geomagnetic excursions are debated. Conflating inundation with pole behavior is irresponsible. He ended with treat as heuristic, not doctrine. That should have been the end. But outside the file, something else was moving. Magnetic North Sprint forced an early world magnetic model update in 2019, and refined parameters arrived again with WMM 2025. Insurance maps repainted coastal risk. Logistics planners, independent of any psychic sketch, were shifting warehousing inland. None of that proved the map. It eroded resistance. If reality is moving, you look for models. Delta 3, flawed as it was, looked like a model. Inside the office, language began to harden. A risk officer wrote, "acceptable survivability floor" in a draft, shorthand for "if we can't save 100%, what baseline do we plan for?" The phrase stuck. Another analyst changed exclusion zones to flow denial, the euphemism you use when you want to brief without setting off alarms. The viewer sensed the shift. Clinical notes later released mention migraines after the session, a nosebleed, and a recurring dream. Children at a sealed gate, the sound of locks. They asked for the transcript to carry a disclaimer. Cull was meant as a natural process warning. Predators trim the herd, now a caution, not instruction. Bureaucracy likes clarity more than caveat. Cull traveled with the packet. This was the contamination point, the moment of vision intended as heuristic bled into architecture. A map layer meant to provoke questions started to feel like an answer. And because the stakes felt existential, the normal immune system, peer review, replication, external critique, lost ground to a faster reflex. Hedge now, justify later. Meanwhile, across the hall, the file wasn't just being read. It was being routed to people who pour concrete. The folder's craft stock didn't look special. The stamps did. Eyes only. Limit distro. A sealed envelope labeled mirror set held the second map. A junior analyst digitized both, overlaid paleomagnetic sensitivity layers, storm surge corridors, and rail adjacency. They wrote the caution in the margin. Correlation is not equal to causation, then underlined 3 places where the shapes rhyme. Beside it, rail adjacency, deep rock, non-coastal hubs. The next slip moved it to continuity planners, the Mount Weather crowd, the Raven Rock lineage. Their pencil note, map layer flagged rail adjacency, and under it, procurement codes for seed lines, hardened comms, long shelf life meds. That's not theory. That's logistics. So a contested sketch gained a scenario tag, a gate list, and a budget lane. Nobody declared it true. They declared it too costly to ignore. That's how a vision became a plan. The file they sealed, session IDs, chain of custody, and the map. The folder looked ordinary, craft stock, string tie, but the spine told a different story. A clean session ID, date, viewer code, monitor initials. The date matters because it syncs with a documented drift spike that forced an early world magnetic model correction in 2019 and a parameter rethink leading into WMM 2025. That's not proof, just a drumbeat. Inside, the transcript carries the graphite map, messy pressure marks, erasures ghosting under fresh lines, and the word that wouldn't sit still. Cull. The routing slip is the breadcrumb trail. First stop, the low probability / high impact unit, the people who babysit nightmares. Retain pending is typed once and circled. A hand adds Delta 3 candidate, hold. Along the edge, in cramped pencil, cross-check paleo shift overlays. That pushes the packet to an analyst with NOAA time series taped to their wall, the kind who speaks in error bars. They don't bless anything. They overlay. This is where a sketch becomes a layer. The graphite coastlines and ridges are scanned, georectified, then laid under archived storm surge models, subsidence maps, and paleomagnetic sensitivity zones. A warning goes in the margin. Correlation is not equal to causation. But 3 alignments sit stubborn. Interior ridges that match hard rock spines, corridors that rhyme with inland rail trunks, and junctions where non-coastal hubs already exist. The analyst writes tags, not orders. Rail adjacency, deep rock, non-coastal hubs. Chain of custody tightens. The second routing slip names custodians, records officer, program manager, legal liaison. Each adds a date and a shorthand. Contested, one writes. LPHI retain, says another. Legal adds, policy exposure, limit distro. The stamp, eyes only, lands on the final page with a list of 5. That list includes an office that doesn't theorize, it procures. Then the envelope that changes the temperature. Sealed. Inserted later. Labeled mirror set. Inside, a second independent session summary from a different contractor, task blind. The geometry isn't identical, but the rhyme is ugly. Inland arteries, dead zones along low-lying coasts, and a bias to hardened interior nodes. The analyst bracketing overlaps writes, independent convergence, with a heavy question mark. 2 contested sketches now point the same way. An internal email summary circulates, 3 paragraphs for hedges. Contested source, it begins. Low probability / high impact scenario set, retain pending. The last line is the tell. Recommend placeholder within continuity drill architecture until indicators clarify. That's how a layer gets a seat without a vote. Once it sits, rooms rearrange. Continuity planners get it next, people with mount. Weather and Raven rock in their institutional memory. Their pencil note, map layer flagged, rail adjacency. Under it, procurement codes that mean pallets move, long shelf life meds, seed lines, EMP hardened comms. You won't find a headline. You'll find a truck schedule. Archive mechanics kick in. The packet gets a shelf code, a reevaluation date 5 years out, and a pencil ad, black book, active. Legal routes a memo about policy exposure and insists on sunsets for any activation touching movement. The operational reply is a compromise. Heuristic adopted as model layer, gated by thresholds. Gates tied to orthodox indicators. An early WMM update. Insurance withdrawal indices shifting inland. Infrastructure stress alerts in coastal load centers. 2 of 3 must cross before escalation. It reads cautious, and it keeps the layer alive. A junior tries to break the spell. They build a transparency aligning the sketch's corridors with real-world upgrades. Rail sidings extended at inland choke points. Inland port renovations with storm-rated roofs. Fiber trunk redundancy along ridgebacks. They write correlation pressure in the margin. The human habit of trusting a line more when concrete appears nearby. The science advisor writes the sentence planners hate. Treat RV-derived layers as heuristic, not evidence. The interpreter echoes it on the cover. Heuristic input, operational model only. The list of custodians grows methodically. A records officer logs access. A program manager checks LIMDs. A legal liaison writes, no public lanes. A continuity director adds a sticky note with 3 letters and a number. D3. That's the quiet promotion. Delta 3 shows up on tabletop agendas and scenario catalogs, in drill injects labeled geophysical stress. Broad enough to mean storm, grid, or space weather. Meanwhile, the file accretes small tells. A health system orders badge printers that can encode triage and movement permissions. A rail operator buys handheld scanners keyed to mission fit. A county warehouse installs turnstiles that default closed if power drops. None of these cite a map. All of them sit along its bones. The descent lane doesn't die, it gets boxed. A memo restates the boundary. Heuristics set questions. Evidence sets thresholds. Ethics set limits. The reply acknowledges it, then adds operational gravity. Thresholds met trigger drills only. No flow denial actions under provisional. It holds for a quarter. Language drifts. Flow smoothing appears beside gate discipline. The interpreter writes in the margin, release at pinch, default to expand. It sticks in one region's playbook and vanishes in the national draft. The chain ends, for now, with a name we can place on other Black Swan protocols. They sign the archive card and write one more lever on the wall. If WMM early update repeats or coastal insurance retreat accelerates, elevate to policy lane. Not a prophecy, a condition. If the world tugs the lever, the folder moves. That's the sealed file's secret. It isn't a verdict. It's a readiness. A graphite layer became a layer in budgets, drills, and doors. Not because anyone proved a vision, because enough of it rhymed with a country already walking uphill. Macro versus micro, the paradox takes shape. From the balcony, the plan sounds clean. Preserve a viable human seed through turbulence. Keep knowledge intact, bodies healthy, governance coherent enough to restart. Corridors on a map, hardened nodes, prepositioned supplies, hedges, not choices. Drop to street level, and every corridor line cuts someone out. That's the paradox. Macro survival on paper becomes micro exclusion at the gate. You see it first in closed drills, not the ribbon ones. The clock starts. Egress latency becomes a number. If a coastal node can't clear within set minutes, the scenario toggles from rescue to flow denial. The phrase is sterile until a logistics lead murmurs, "We don't have the buses." In that sentence, the moral math starts. To save the most, plan for less than all. Sealed lists sharpen the edge. Mission essential, continuity cadre, critical skills. The nouns are bloodless. Grid ops, potable systems, trauma level, cryoseed stewardship, comms backbone. Yet the pattern stings. The further you live from a mapped axis, the less likely your name lands on a manifest. Inland facilities run HR audits. Fitness baselines, immunizations, shift endurance, confined space tolerance. A contractor gets a wink. Congrats, you're corridor compatible. The laugh dries fast. Outside the fence, procurement makes ethics real. Long shelf life meds vanish into depots sited where the viewer's pencil went dark. EMP-hardened radios show up in county sheds that never drew federal attention. An inland rail junction gets an easement for resilience upgrades and a nudge to rezone for population flow. The planner asks, from where? The memo stays quiet. Correlation pressure keeps pushing. Magnetic north sprint forced an early WMM. Update in 2019 and Fed WMM 2025. Insurers retreat from coasts. Heat and surge seasons cut deeper. None of that proves a corridor. It rationalizes one. If the ocean is already pushing in and premiums are already fleeing, a spine feels prudent. Repeat prudent often enough, and it becomes permission. Here's how the but/therefore logic writes itself in rooms like these. We want to avoid panic, but choke points are inevitable. Therefore we design gates that can harden. We want to minimize harm, but stampedes kill faster. Therefore we authorize area denial framed as safety. We want doctrine humane, but indicators might trip early. Therefore we keep language soft so we can move hard. Every therefore carries moral injury forward like interest on a debt. Microstories fill the air gaps. A maintenance tech at an inland port swears the new concrete is overkill. Mesh dense enough for a missile site. A nurse gets a triage module with an addendum. Non-transport candidates, comfort protocol. A dispatcher complains of resonance tests on inland rail that align a little too neatly with the sketched corridors. Nothing illegal. Everything aligned. Inside, dissent phrase doesn't vanish. A policy lawyer demands sunset clauses on any geophysical authority touching movement. Draft soften dates. Review at 90 days. A science advisor keeps the line. Remote viewing is contested. Treat map layers as heuristic. The interpreter gates activation to orthodox indicators, WMM adjustments, insurance withdrawal indices, infrastructure stress alerts, and adds. No flow denial under provisional. It buys time. Language still drifts. Flow smoothing sits beside gate discipline, and the latter keeps better friends. The paradox crystallizes in the scoring engine. Mission continuity profiles rank skills that keep nodes alive: grid, water, trauma, dispatch. Cross-trainability climbs. Health baselines sneak in: endurance, medication dependence, heat tolerance. It isn't framed as purity, it's downtime math. Then come the soft screens: startle response, decision speed and noise, sleep debt resilience. The algorithm optimizes throughput. It also prunes people. Someone calls it quiet eugenics pressure. The rebuttal says it's trio. Both are watching the same columns. Historical echoes don't help. Lifeboat ethics live here. How many seats before the hull dips, whose weight steps off? Wartime triage whispers: immediate, delayed, expectant. In hospitals, expectant means comfort when resources can't save. In corridors, expectant becomes a gate rule that never says its name. A medic argues pretending keeps you human long enough to find another bus. A planner points at the clock. There's a fix on the table the algorithm hates first and learns to like: decentralize. Instead of a few thick spines, build distributed microshelters, schools, churches, clinics with water, ventilation, battery banks, trading control for access. Early runs look messy: leakage, gaming, crowd noise. Second pass priors show survival diversity up, panic decay faster, medium-term recovery stronger. Command loses clarity, neighborhoods gain agency. The spreadsheet calls it noisy. Biology calls it resilient. Reframe the optimization target. Shift from throughput purity to survival diversity. Score neighbor effects: who stabilizes a block, who teaches, who stitches skills, alongside critical tasks. Replace floor with ladder. Criteria that widen under stress and publish a path to entry. Force every lock to carry a timer, a reason, and a reopen trigger. Measure leaders on releases made safely, not just assets preserved. Public vocabulary has to split less. Outside, resilience. Inside, egress suppression and manifest integrity. Collapse them. Post criteria now. Publish thresholds and sunset clocks. Require after-action numbers on denied flow and reopened gates. Ask the hardware question out loud at procurement. Are these gates designed to open first? The planet will keep doing what it does. Poles wander, models update every 5 years, storms stack. Those facts justify hardened comms, spare transformers, paper navigation. They don't justify deciding who gets water. Heuristics set questions. Evidence sets thresholds. Ethics set limits. The macro plan only earns its name if the micro choices stay human at the fence. And if independent systems are already drifting into alignment, the urgency is to set humane defaults now, not after the hardware learns to hold. The build-out, dugs, corridors, and logistics that shouldn't exist. While the memos argued verbs, excavators answered with bedrock. Old continuity sites, Mount Weather in Virginia, Raven Rock along the Maryland-Pennsylvania line, took on projects that don't happen without justification. Not press tours, procurement with teeth. Ventilation retrofits specified for overpressure and smoke scrubbing. Power rooms doubled with diesel bays and battery strings separated by blast curtains. Environmental filings list rock stabilization and drainage improvements, then show bore patterns that mirror interior ridges the sketch hugged. Across the federal arc, county boards got quiet visits about access improvements to legacy facilities. Asphalt appears, culverts drop, signage stays temporary. A retired electrician says he pulled cable for a switch room labeled AJCC Shadow, the kind of alternate linkage that keeps command alive if the primary goes dark. He keeps his non-disclosure. He tells his brother, second spines live. Rails paint the clearest rhyme. Sidings lengthen at inland choke points, not seaports. Ballast gets swapped for heavier aggregate. Welded rail installs on lines ignored for decades. Dispatchers grumble about slow orders for resonance tests on segments that happen to trace the corridor axis. Union reps call it safety overkill. Test cars roll at night with accelerometers strapped to frames. An engineer taps the graph and says, they're qualifying this for loads that don't stop. Insurance underwriters, telecom planners, and rail schedulers don't meet in secret, but their upgrades land on the same map like they did. Inland ports, dry intermodal yards far from tidewater, sprout storm-rated roofs and side-loading doors that accept modular barricades. Bid specs call for door frames that can take add-on blast plates, roof diaphragms built to shrug off hurricane gusts where hurricanes don't go, floor slabs fibered for abnormal point loads. Public language says sustainability and resilience. Internal notes mention standoff and ingress control hardware available. Available means boxed, barcode, waiting. What vanishes tells the rest. Hospital buyers find long shelf life antibiotics perpetually backordered. Warehouse managers at cold chain firms mention federal sweeps that clear racks in a day. Seed inventories, upland, drought-tolerant lines get absorbed by research consortia with security clauses. The purchase codes route through agencies that don't farm. Phone trees go friendly and blank. Telecom hides in plain sight. Redundant fiber reroutes inland, shadowing ridgebacks. Microwave relays pop along high ground to clear line-of-sight paths that mirror rail. Tower techs show off racks with EMP-hardened enclosures and laugh that storms won't knock these out. They mean thunder. The spec means space weather and grid slaps. The map layer never gets mentioned. The hardware keeps arriving. Freight schedules, insurance corridors, and telecom backbones accidentally share the same ridgelines, three industries aligning without a memo. Staffing shifts carry the moral math on their backs. Mission Essential becomes a checkbox that triggers extra screenings and inoculation bundles. Criteria don't post, but the pattern repeats. Water plants, trauma centers, rail control rooms, inland logistics hubs. A manager says they were told to profile for continuity fitness, endurance, cross-trainability, low med dependency. He shrugs. If the freeway closes, I need folks who can sleep on a cot and run a forklift at 3 a.m. Public vocabulary keeps the room calm. Grid reliability, supply chain modernization, resilience hubs. The internal slide decks use the other nouns: population flow management, gate discipline, node integrity. A city near a junction updates zoning to facilitate population flow, then asks where the people are coming from. The answer doesn't land on paper. A contractor in the High Plains pours a communications substructure under a logistics park. The rebar schedule is dense, wall ties continuous. The spec calls for sacrificial cable trays designed to rip and replace after a surge. He asks if it's a storm shelter. The site lead points to the ridge and says one word: corridor. The humor drains out of the day. Seed banks replicate quietly away from Svalbard's cameras. AG labs establish upland field stations with redundant cryo units and vehicle traps at perimeters. Press releases talk drought and rust resistance. Shipping manifests show duplicate accessions moving inland. A geneticist gives the practical reason. You site where the grid recovers first and the road stays open. That's corridor logic without the metaphysics. Transit agencies rehearse inverse plays. Coastal regions refine evacuation time curves and stage last bus drills. Inland jurisdictions work on ingress smoothing, metered entry, credential scanning, staging lots. Drafts carry activated thresholds in the footer. They're provisional until they aren't. A health system orders badge printers that encode triage priority and movement permissions. A rail operator buys handhelds that unlock gates for mission fit. A county installs turnstiles that default closed on power loss. All legal, all directional. Inside continuity circles, veterans argue for open corridors and posted criteria. Newer hires answer with throughput math and incident timelines. The argument isn't theater, it's doctrine in wet concrete. Meanwhile, orthodox indicators keep humming. WMM updated early in 2019, then again refined into WMM 2025. Insurers withdraw from coastal zip codes. Storm season stress transformers that were never meant to swallow geomagnetically induced currents. Budgets don't need prophecy, they need cover. The viewer's graphite lines don't appear on a blueprint. They echo across 100 decisions, which siding to lengthen, which slab to thicken, which hill gets fiber, which badge opens a gate when the grid blinks. The corridor accretes. Once it exists, flow denial stops being a phrase and becomes a lever. The hardware works either way, open wide or hold tight. Doctrine decides which default wins when the timer starts. The planet moves, magnetic drift, excursions, and historical echoes. The concrete was catching up to a fear. The planet, meanwhile, kept to its own tempo. Magnetic north didn't stay put. Through the late 20th century, it wandered like it always does. Then in the 1990s, it sprinted, accelerating toward Siberia at roughly 50 to 60 kilometers a year. That sprint forced an early world magnetic model update in 2019, and the latest refresh, WMM 2025, tightened the math again. Then the drift slowed to about 35 kilometers a year. Fast, then slower. Not reassuring, just complicated. Here's the baseline you can stand on. Earth's magnetic field comes from a churning outer core, iron moving, heat flowing, a dynamo throwing lines of force. Those lines wander, strengthen, weaken, tilt. Sometimes, over thousands of years, they flip. More often, they stumble in what geophysicists call excursions. Temporary tilts and collapses where the dipole weakens, poles roam, and the field gets messy for a few millennia before recovering. The last big stumble, the Lost Champs excursion around 41,000 years ago, left fingerprints in lava, sediments, even tree rings. During that window, the dipole's strength dropped to a small fraction of today's. The auroral ovals wandered, and extra radiation reached the upper atmosphere. Now, planners love a clean push-pull between magnetism and climate. The data refuses to behave. Some ice cores at high latitudes don't show big temperature swings during Lost Champs. Other records, paired with atmospheric models, suggest a weakened field plus a quiet sun can thin ozone, bend circulation, and drive regional weirdness. The honest sentence is boring. Excursions likely amplify atmospheric noise and technology risk more than they steer sea level. Sea level is heat and ice, not compasses. But a noisy sky still matters in a wired century. Satellites glitch. GPS correction goes off. Long lines pick up geomagnetically induced currents and transformers hum hot. You don't need a reversal to have a bad decade. Meanwhile, the South Atlantic anomaly kept spreading, a patch of weak field that satellites hate. Archaeomagnetic reconstructions show similar patches in the past. Comfort and warning both. Comfort because the planet has lived through them. Warning because anomalies sometimes show up near excursions, and excursions can tilt fast compared to human plans. Multiple studies argue the auroral oval wandered widely during Lost Champs, 41,000 years ago, with dipole tilting over a few hundred years. That's within cultural memory if it happened now. So the threshold language hardened. No one in the careful rooms wrote imminent flip. They wrote gates tied to orthodox indicators. If the next WMM arrives early again, if field asymmetries deepen, if grid stress and storm season stack, escalate drills. That's not mysticism. That's risk discipline. A magnetometer doesn't justify a locked gate. A magnetometer plus a heat dome plus a regional blackout starts a chain where managers reach for the lever they already built. History drops a quieter echo. Genetic bottlenecks show up in our DNA. Migration pulses appear in archaeology. None of that assigns a single cause, and it's bad history to pretend it does. But turbulence squeezes populations through narrow places. For hunter bands, the corridor was a pass through rock and wind. For us, the corridor is a map of rail, power, water, and trust. The moral geometry rhymes even if the physics doesn't. There's a second layer to the echo, our dependency stack. Reversals in the geologic record took thousands of years. Excursions moved quicker, but still on human-long timelines. The vulnerability we've added is faster. Timing signals depend on ionospheric corrections. Supply chains depend on navigation that assumes clean models. Power grids stretch across long resistive lines. A field minimum mixed with a bad solar season turns a space weather story into a logistics story. That's where the corridor logic finds fuel without ever invoking the viewer's graphite. Here's the guardrail we keep repeating to ourselves because it's the only honest one. Heuristics set questions. Evidence sets thresholds. Ethics set limits. The geophysics supports hardening comms, diversifying navigation, staging spare transformers inland, and practicing paper backups. It does not support deciding whose wristband opens water. The history supports redundancy and distributed shelter. It does not support sealed manifests that assume a human bottleneck is virtuous. Meanwhile, the indicators that made cautious people twitch haven't gone away. The field weakened roughly 10% over 2 centuries, then its asymmetries shifted. The WMM moved mid-cycle once. Now it tightened again for 2025. Insurers redrew risk on coastlines for reasons that have nothing to do with magnetism and everything to do with heat and surge. Power operators are planning resilient spines inland. Each stream is defensible. Their convergence is operational. Gravity. It pulls Doctrine whether or not anyone believes in psi. So where does that leave the map layer? In the only place it ever deserved to sit, as a provocation to widen corridors, not to narrow them. If upper atmosphere noise grows, add gates, don't lock them. If GPS wobbles, publish detours, don't privatize them. If transformers sing, move spares inland and teach neighborhoods to run without the spine for a while. The planet is going to do what it does. Our job is to keep the defaults humane when the dials go red. Because here's the quiet truth the viewer tried to write in a margin, and the interpreter kept trying to salvage in footnotes. The field is a handrail. The corridor is a choice. If we build it to exhale, release at pinch, ladders over floors, criteria that widen under stress, we might survive the noisy decade with our values intact. If we build it to hold its breath, the planet won't have to kill us. We'll do the job at the gate. The interpreter, the analyst who turned vision into doctrine. He didn't look like the spark in a conspiracy. Mid-40s, careful shirt, a habit of tapping the corner of a page when language slid. His lane was risk, not revelation. Translate weird inputs into knobs the system could turn without pretending they were true. He'd built dam failure trees, pathogen spillover cascades, and grid collapse chains. If a thing could tip a region, he wrote the cards that told operators where to put sandbags first. Delta 3 hit his desk because he was trusted to keep knives sheathed. He started by stripping the mystique. Survivability corridors became transport resilience axes. Exclusion zones turned into egress constraint regions. At the top, he dropped a guardrail, heuristic input, operational model layer only. Then he did the work that makes a sketch dangerous. He built constraints. Not causes, not claims, ratios and lags. Coastal egress time versus inland rail intake. Fuel days versus hospital bed turnover. Credential friction versus queue decay. Each got a letter, a range, and a sensitivity curve. He called it Delta 3 because letters calm committees. The spine wasn't the map. It was the way the room could move without arguing magnetism. If K, the egress to intake ratio, exceeded a set band, choke nodes appeared at predictable distances from the coast given fuel F and credential friction C. Change K, F, or C, and the choke points walked. The RV lines receded behind algebra. Choices stood forward. University relocations, insurance withdrawals, and telecom reroutes started aligning with Delta 3's axes. Independent confirmation by inertia, not intent. The bad phrase showed up in a comment bubble he planned to delete. Acceptable survivability floor. His shorthand for the minimum, you could keep alive without collapsing the system under worst-case combined stressors. He swapped it later for planning baseline survivability floor, softer, still a floor. A science advisor flagged it as a moral sinkhole. He nodded and left the warning at the top. Treat RV as heuristic, not evidence. Then he added gates tied to sober dials, WMM early update, insurance retreat index crossing inland, coastal grid stress alerts. 2 of 3 must trip for provisional activation. He thought the gate would buy ethics time. He wrote a second memo and kept it out of version control until he could breathe. Title: Selection Pressure versus Selection Policy. Point: Pressure squeezes populations when systems fail. Policy decides who gets squeezed. He argued for resisting policy. Design corridors to widen under stress. Publish criteria. Favor redundancy over throughput. He knew throughput would push back. The meeting that moved Delta 3 from Annex to Agenda was Meet Grinder and Mirror. Operators listed hard limits: buses, diesel, nurses, transformers. He refused to put the viewer's language on the table. He spoke only in constraints. When a deputy asked, "What's the trigger?" he slid a one-pager. Provisional activation when 2 gates cross and a third trends for 30 days. Activation equals drills deepen, manifests refresh, capacity expands. No flow denial. He wrote that last line twice on the slide, so the room would read it even when they wanted not to. Afterward, an internal note blessed provisional activation if gates tripped. Not policy, permission. He sprinted back into the Doctrine draft and hard-coded a break. No flow denial actions under provisional activation. It held for 1 cycle. Then language started to drift. Flow smoothing gained a friend, gate discipline. He added a margin note in his own chicken scratch. Release at pinch, default to expand. He won that phrasing in one region's quick start guide. The national draft replaced it with dynamic perimeter management. He wasn't blind to the build creeping into hardware. He saw the badge printers, the yard scanners keyed to mission fit, the turnstiles that defaulted closed on power loss. He filed a quiet requirement. Every closure needed a timer, a reason, and an auto-reopen trigger when conditions eased. He tied that to after-action reporting. Count the minutes the gate stayed shut, list the releases, log the people who got through on appeal. Some regions hated the paperwork. A few learned the habit. He tried to reach the viewer. Through a program manager, he sent a one-line note. We're treating Cull as hazard language. No reply. A colleague told him the viewer had written a letter. Prune, not burn. Widen at pinch. He tried to footnote author intent into the Doctrine. Red bubble. Remove, confusing. He lost that fight. He underlined ladders, not floors, in his own drafts until the pen almost tore the page. When the first gate twitched, insurers pulling harder from 2 coastal belts, his phone lit. We move. He looked at the dashboard. 1 of 3. We watch, he said, and added an ethics check before elevation boxed to buy another week. He weaponized process, version holds, threshold reviews, word audits, to slow the slide from drills to denial. He knew process is a sandbar. He built more of them anyway. He kept a list of swaps he believed could survive battle rhythm. Replace sealed manifests with posted criteria plus auxiliary rosters that expand when capacity appears. Replace integrity as a body filter with integrity as data transparency. Publish the why behind every gate. Replace thick spines with many thin ladders, micro-shelters seated with water, air, and light. He pitched them as risk mitigations, not virtues, because that's how rooms like his hear. He wasn't naive. He'd seen floors become targets. He'd watched euphemisms turn into doors. His job, as he defined it, was to keep the heuristic a question, the evidence a gate, and the ethic a limit that held when the sirens spiked. On the draft's last page, beside PBSF, he wrote a line that never made it to a slide. If we need a floor, we're already late. Build ladders. Then he underlined ladders twice and went to the next meeting. The 8-minute spike, the viewer's breakdown, and the one detail they regretted. The nightmare started the same way every time. A low electrical hum rising under the skin, a rush of stale air, then the sound, metal sliding, bolts turning, a rhythm that felt like a clock made of locks. In the dream, the viewer stood on the outside, palms damp against chain mesh, children's hands pressed back. 8 minutes of noise. Then silence, like the room decided who counted. That's where they woke, throat raw, heart hammering, counting ceiling tiles until the world thinned. Clinicians wrote vicarious trauma in tidy letters. Headaches that turned light into needles. 2 nosebleeds, bright and thin. sleep shredded into shards. The program doctor logged monitor. The viewer wrote a different sentence in a spiral notebook. It's not a sketch anymore. They asked to append an annotation to the packet. Plain words to cage a slippery one. Cull, they wrote, was descriptive of pressure in crowds, prune the jam, widen the exit. Not removal. Hazard, not instruction. The reply arrived with polite starch. Addenda will be considered during review. The spike arrived in a clinic, ordinary room, plastic wrist cuff hissing. A TV in the hallway looped footage of a flood line edging a city block. The clock's colon blinked. The heart rate monitor jumped like a startled animal. The nurse stepped out. The viewer stared at the drop ceiling and tried to breathe in counts of 4. The EKG went jagged for 8 minutes. After, the chart said panic-like event. The viewer wrote locks, then underlined it twice. They'd carried one symbol for years, a personal glyph they used whenever a session picked up crowd pressure. Tight loop, arrow through. It meant widen here, relieve, release. In ecology terms, cull pressure, trim the constraint to let the herd pass. The sketch's margin used that shorthand beside herd movement, and a clumsy parenthesis turned a verb about bottlenecks into a noun about people. That was the regret. Not the map. The glyph. A shape that looked actionable to someone who didn't share its history. Word traveled the wrong direction. A friend inside the relay lane, the folks who turned scenarios into drills, called from a noisy kitchen, fan roaring to cloak tone. Your word's in the decks, they said quiet. It reads like a function now. The viewer's voice cracked on the recording. It was a warning, they said. It meant open. The friend said, they boxed it under gate discipline. The call ended with both staring at walls. Medical leave arrived as a form letter. Time to breathe that didn't fix language drift. They walked laps around a neighborhood block, counting intersections like talismans. They avoided rail crossings. They started collecting people in their head like anchors. The bus driver with an inhaler who still runs his route on bad air days. The night nurse who knits dishcloths for an ICU break room. The line cook who naps in a compact car between doubles. None of them look like a scalar in a throughput model. All of them would end up on the wrong side of a checkpoint if the gates misread intention. The agency sent a clinician versed in performance under stress. Breath ladders, grounding with cold water, naming 5 sounds, for textures 3 smells. It helped until an email leaked from a regional tabletop. The subject line read, flow denial successful. The body described a barrier test at a cloverleaf where manifest integrity held under crowd appeal. The viewer folded the printout into a tight square and wrote, not instruction, across the crease. They kept trying to fix the glyph with ink. A letter, handwritten, careful block print. I meant prune, not burn. Cull pressure equals widen exit. 2 gates have crush at pinch points, even if throughput dips briefly. Please add parallel gates at known chokes. They drew the loop and arrow in the corner, then slashed through it, a warning to anyone who'd put a box around the symbol and mistaken it for a blade. They routed the letter through a program manager with a good memory and a bad poker face. The receipt stamp landed. The trail blurred. 8 minutes became a private timer. If the hum rose and the pulse skittered, they set a thumb on a kitchen stopwatch and waited for minute 9. The body always came back by 8. The file did not. Draft language slid while they slept. Rescue window to stability posture, last bus sweep to perimeter hold. The interpreter fought nouns into softer shapes in one region, release at pinch, and watched the national draft flatten it to dynamic perimeter management. A micro-story made the regret solid. A regional exercise paused traffic on a ridge road to simulate a heat dome evac. The facilitator called, cull pressure. Half the room heard widen, half heard hold. A barrier truck rolled anyway, slotting hardware into sockets poured months before. After action, flow denial effective. The scribe didn't log the split second where a medic asked, where do they go? And the answer was a blank square labeled staging. They met the friend with the kitchen fan once more, in a parking lot, engine idling. The friend handed back a folded scan. A red bubble in a draft had killed the footnote that would have carried hazard, not instruction. The viewer nodded like someone who'd seen a forecast hit. Leak intent, they said, even if it lands as rumor. The friend said rumors don't move gates. The viewer said intent does if you write it right. They didn't come back to the room. Sleep improved, the clinic wrote and closed the line. The glyph kept showing up, blurry in photos, sharp in muscle memory. The word kept traveling with a box around it. In the viewer's notebook, last page, 2 sentences sit under a date. widen at pinch. Ladders over floors. Then a third darker. Heuristics don't bleed, people do. The meetings, minutes, code words, and the pivot from rescue to rationing. The first minutes still sounded like rescue. Egress latency unacceptable, redeploy buses to reduce dwell. You can hear the urgency without the edge. By the next quarter, the nouns started to calcify. Crowd friction became flow resistance. A new line appeared beneath the timing charts, perimeter stabilization. Same rooms, same coffee, a different default. Code crept in sideways. Asset hardening, used to mean transformers and server racks. Now the slide showed school gyms and clinics. The caption didn't flinch. Asset. A footnote introduced R. Not rescue, but reproduction number, borrowed from epidemiology to quantify panic propagation. It turned crowd behavior into a curve you could flatten with gates. April's tabletop was the hinge. Inject, coastal power loss during a heat dome, with a rail signal fault inland. The old script would surge buses and float nurses forward. The new agenda opened with gate discipline. On the wall, a timer. At the back, a calm mantra, manifest integrity. The phrase landed in the minutes as a header. It would come back blacked out months later. Procurement followed language. A budget line under humanitarian corridor security added non-lethal area denial. On paper, that's foam barriers and smoke. In the field, it's geometry that can pivot from guidance to refusal without changing hardware. Legal asked for a definition in humanitarian contexts. The written answer read, to maintain movement. The margin note, not recorded, whispered, whose movement? Draft authorities thickened. A memo proposed a geophysical emergency category, broad enough to cover storm, grid, or space weather, anchored to review at 90 days. Edits softened sunset into review. Another memo expanded credential coverage to dependents of mission essential, which turned a tight manifest into a bigger convoy without adding seats. Generous on paper, heavier at the gate. Exercises mutated to match the lexicon. A coastal city that had practiced last bus sweeps ran a scenario with 2 fragility. Points earmarked for flow denial. The facilitator said it plain. We deny here to preserve throughput there. A logistics officer raised the public line problem. What happens when someone films the barrier? Communications flashed a slide. Temporary safety posture to reduce crush risk. Crush risk is real. It also hides choices. A planner asked the unforgivable operational question. Where do they go while we reduce crush risk? The answer came dressed as policy. Staging outside the corridor until ingress resumes. The word staging implies water, shade, toilets. The field knows staging sometimes means asphalt and heat. The minutes logged more code. Ingress smoothing. Egress suppression. Suppression shouldn't sit beside rescue, but there it was, paired with soft measures. The inventory list quietly expanded, mesh nets, acoustic hailers, smart bollards that lock into patterns with ambulance-sized gaps. The vendor called it flow shaping. No one said denial. They didn't need to. One draft titled a paragraph, Manifest Integrity Enforcement. The unredacted line above it read, Credentials breached in recent drill. Propose MIE to ensure corridor throughput. You don't need the missing bullets to guess. Pull unlisted bodies from lines when generosity outruns protocol. Training rewired muscle memory. Rescue window became our window, then slid off the page. Stability-centric operations replaced rescue-centric response on a cover sheet. Inside, a colored box instructed officers when to be deaf. Crowd appeals, left side. Perimeter collapse risk, right side. When the right box went red, the left became background noise. No one typed that sentence. Everyone heard it. Regional drills synced their posture. A river city rehearsed egress suppression on 2 bridges while flipping lanes for inbound convoys. The police chief asked if that was legal without a standing order. Legal pointed to the Geophysical Authority draft, once declared. The chief circled once. Rooms like this here when. Microstories tested the edges. A hospital lead asked whether asset hardening, pediatric meant locks. It means standoff, the brief said. The next slide cued Guardian Credential Pre-Assign. That's a fast lane for some parents and a lifetime of waiting for others. A dissenting voice pushed for posted criteria. The answer warned about gaming. Someone muttered that secrecy invites stampede. The recorder left that out. A bridge tabletop logged a phrase that shouldn't anchor doctrine. Manifest purity. The interpreter pushed his pen into the margin and wrote, no purity tests. He offered a swap, manifest transparency, publish criteria, allow appeal windows, auto-expand lists when capacity appears. He won a pilot in one region. The national doc filed the idea as optional. Hardware rehearsals hardened habits. Dynamic perimeter management became the umbrella for a play that started with release and under pressure shifted to hold. One after-action measured success in perimeter stability minutes. Another tracked breach attempts deterred. A lone line counted releases at pinch. It didn't trend. Legal kept tugging on sunset strings. Authority drafts anchored to 90 days melted into review at 90 days. The interpreter lobbied for timers on gates. Every closure needed a reason and an auto-reopen trigger. The requirement survived as a checkbox, then as an optional field. Operators hate paperwork. Gates love silence. The last meeting in the stack carried one hard question through the door. When do we tell the public we can close? Silence. Then the interpreter, voice even. When we can say we open first and prove it. He was trying to nail policy to practice. The room nodded. The minutes recorded, public messaging under development. The timer on the wall kept running. Impossible physics or operational heuristic. This is where rooms split in two. On one side, lab habits, pre-registration, blinding, replication or it didn't happen. On the other, operators with clocks. Move if it helps, apologize later if it doesn't. Remote viewing has lived in that crack for 50 years. SRI papers, Army memos, CIA reviews, a declassification wave in the mid-199s that called the results of uncertain value, and still left a trail of operational anecdotes. Both truths fit, contested in journals, occasionally useful in fog. Operational use isn't peer review, it's triage. If a viewer once drew a river bend and a rusted bridge that helped a pilot pick a search box, nobody in a helicopter debates effect sizes. They search. That's utility, not proof. Delta 3 took that stance. Treat the sketch as a heuristic, something to provoke questions and point to vulnerabilities you'd need to check anyway. The interpreter bolted that warning to the cover. Heuristic input, operational model layer only. Then he tied movement to sober dials. World magnetic model adjustments, insurance retreat inland, coastal infrastructure stress. 2 of 3 must. Trip, he wrote before drills expand. Not gates close, drills expand. The scientific record stayed messy on purpose. Meta-analyses argued over tiny effects. Protocol critics flagged queuing, sensory leakage, statistics with too many degrees of freedom. The CIA's 1995 review gave the program a shrug. Interesting, inconsistent, not a basis for policy. None of that changes because a corridor rhymes with rail. The fix is boundary discipline. Heuristics set hypotheses. Evidence sets thresholds. Ethics set limits. Once that chain breaks, a sketch becomes a switch. So why not dump the psi layer entirely? Because its safest use isn't as a claim, it's as a nag. Treat it like a dubious tip. You don't raid the house, you widen surveillance. In corridor terms, you ask, where are the likely choke points regardless of magnetism? Which bridges fail on egress times? How do we relieve pressure before we control it? Then you task engineers, not gate buyers. The danger came when nouns hardened, exclusion, denial, integrity. Words that turn friction into targets. Meanwhile, the real world fed the bias. Magnetic North raced in the 199s and 200s, forcing an early WMM update in 2019. The 2025 release refined the track again. Insurers retreated from floodplains for climate reasons, not compasses. Grid operators mapped inland spines to dodge saltwater substations and storm alleys. None of that proves a pole flip or validates remote viewing. It does create correlation pressure. The feeling that a contested line must be right because budgets are moving nearby. That's psychology, not physics. Keep the physics straight. Excursions like Lost Champs roughly 41,000 years ago weakened the field and tilted the dipole. Impacts on climate remain debated. Some models suggest ozone thinning and circulation shifts when a weak field meets a quiet Sunday. Ice cores at high latitudes show muted temperature change. What's solid is technological risk. Satellite faults, GPS corrections wobbling, geomagnetically induced currents stressing transformers. Those are reasons to harden comms, stash spares inland, practice paper navigation. They aren't reasons to meter water by wristband. Back to the doctrine. The interpreter's gates anchored movement to orthodox indicators, then grafted ethics onto process. No flow denial under provisional activation. He pushed release at pinch into one region's book, swapped floors for ladders and drafts, and tried to make transparency a measurement. Count minutes closed, log releases, publish criteria. That's how you keep a heuristic from becoming permission. You change what success means. Not perimeter stability minutes, but safe releases under stress. The counterargument in the room is sincere. Selection pressure is real. If a bridge can carry only so many, if diesel is finite, if nurses are cooked by hour 16, pretending doesn't make capacity appear. True. That's where selection policy creeps in wearing a safety vest. The algorithm optimizes throughput and quietly prunes people. The repair is to change the objective function. Optimize for survival diversity, not purity. Weight neighbor effects, mentoring, redundancy growth. Build many thin ladders instead of one thick spine. Messy command, steadier humanity. There's a cleaner rule to hold when the clocks get loud. Let contested inputs ask questions. Let verified indicators set stages. Let ethics draw the fence lines you can't step over even when the red lights stack. In practice, park RV-derived layers in an annex. Forbid their nouns and tasks. Require public criteria and auto-expansion triggers. Default to adding exits before barriers. Mandate timers and reasons on every closure. Publish after-action numbers on denied flow and reopened gates. Then drill it until muscle memory moves toward release. Heuristics can be useful without being true. They point. They don't decide. The minute a sketch becomes a lever, you've traded fog lights for a throttle. Keep the throttle tied to facts. Keep the facts tied to limits that don't fail at the gate. Outsider corroborations. Independent maps that align too closely. If the corridor logic lived only in sealed rooms, we could chalk it up to bunker brain. It doesn't. Outside the beltway, models built for reasons that have nothing to do with psi keep sketching the same inland bones, and the rhyme gets hard to ignore. Start with the academics who couldn't care less about remote viewing. Migration labs run agent-based simulations under heat, flood, and crop volatility. They feed in sea level rise, storm surge, housing friction, and job gravity, then watch where people move when stress stacks. The corridors that emerge aren't coastal. They hug high ground with existing transit trunks, drift toward interior rail junctions, and cluster around state capital metros where services persist longer. One team layered water scarcity on storm tracks and watched flow compress through 3 inland bands that look uncomfortably like the transport resilience axes in Delta 3. No magnetics, no mysticism, just heat and habit. Telecom models, built only for uptime, echo the pattern. Ridgeback microwave hops and redundant inland fiber mirror those same trunks without anyone coordinating across sectors. Insurers don't publish poetry, they publish retreat. Premium maps reclassify coastal zip codes from preferred to excluded and quietly bless upland markets. Reinsurance slide decks project multi-decade risk arcs. Storm paths wobble, surge eats floodplains, rebuild fatigue sets in. Where do long-term rates stabilize? On ridges and upland junction towns already wired to freight. The exclusion halos leave a second ring. Places no model can price for defense. The safe harbor dots match the viewer's inland hubs more than anyone in that field would admit on camera. Universities, chasing uninterrupted lab time, open satellite cores inland to diversify risk. Diesel bays and thickened walls say the same thing the premium maps say, without a single meeting between them. Telecom follows revenue like a tide. Trunk fiber replacements pull away from coastal ducts that flood and into ridgeback corridors. Microwave hops pop on high ground, line of sight chains shadowing rail rights of way. Field engineers talk in uptime, not doom, but the pattern is the same. A regional lead after 2 beers puts it bluntly. We build where outages are shortest and trucks can get through. Power planners publish the quietest confirmations. Grid operators in multiple regions propose inland HVDC resilient spines to bypass salt-soaked substations and storm alleys. The nodes they harden map to the same inland junctions, legacy coal or gas switchyards on bedrock, far from surge. None of that needs a sketch. It needs reliability math and a storm history. Seeds and science vote with freezers. The Svalbard Vault gets headlines. The expansion that matters goes to hill towns near grain basins. AGR&D centers announce upland field stations with drought and rust protocols, redundant cryo units, and backup nitrogen. Press releases say adaptation. Procurement notes say perimeter upgrades and generator bays. A plant geneticist shrugs. We cite where the grid comes back first. Universities mirror the drift. A coastal institute opens a core facility 3 hours inland to diversify risk. The brochure glows green. The drawings specify diesel, water bladders, thickened walls, and daylight shafts. Deans call it prudence. Facilities call it a lockable lab that can run when the city can't. Retail logistics is allergic to excess, yet regional resilience hubs appear where rail crosses highway on high ground. Storm-rated roofs, bigger yards, quiet MOUs with emergency managers to host staging. The sites sit just outside flood fringe, on soils that don't liquefy. They're built for business continuity. They double as corridor nodes without saying it. Here's the slide that ties too many threads. A private consortium, insurers, freight majors, and a philanthropy that loves global risk governance, funds a model with a bland name, population continuity model. Its leaked summary animates stability under cascading failures and priority routing for essential flows. The backbone routes match delta, 3 within a thumb's width on a wall map. The language is antiseptic. The geometry is not. A footnote mentions public confidence considerations. Don't publish node names. You can tell a coincidence story. You can also read incentive stacking. Climate pushes inland. Insurance prices follow. Telecom and power protect paying customers. Seeds and labs chase uptime. Logistics chases predictable pavement. Layer those choices and you get a people map that tracks the graphite whether or not anyone ever saw it. That should comfort skeptics. It doesn't, because the convergence creates the same moral geometry. Resources flow to the spine, gaps harden into deserts. Community planners see the drift in their inboxes. Inland towns get resilience hub grants with specs that accept lockable perimeters. County boards approve easements for ingress smoothing. Badges appear at health systems that encode movement permissions for emergencies. None of those memos mention a corridor. All of them assume one. There are outliers worth naming because they hint at a better default. A western state funded microshelters across rural schools, water tanks, ventilation, battery banks, and required public criteria for opening. A Midwestern metro published its triage ladders, skills, neighbor effects, training paths, and tied expansions to heat and air indices, not internal lists. Both took heat for messiness. Both ran summer drills where throughput dipped briefly, and then panic decayed. Release at pinch worked because exits multiplied. The macro pattern is still louder. Independent builders keep laying the same spine. That's not conspiracy, it's compliance with physics, markets, and risk models. Which is why the ethical lever can't wait for a federal doctrine rewrite. Local boards can demand posted criteria now. Procurement can bake open first into gates. After-action reports can count minutes closed and releases made. If we don't push those defaults into the concrete, the corridor will calcify around the few who were always going to fit, and it won't matter who drew the first line. Selection pressure, the algorithms of survival. When corridor logic met HR databases, the map turned into a filter. The phrase sounded harmless, mission continuity profiles. It read like a resume. Underneath, it was a scoring engine that converted people into throughput variables the way dispatch converts trains into slots. Inputs started clean, skills that keep a node alive, grid operations, water chemistry, trauma care, rail dispatch, cold chain maintenance. Cross-trainability climbed your score. Single points of failure pushed it higher. On paper, it looked merciful, keep functions standing. Health slid in next as downtime math, not purity. Baselines appeared: endurance, pulmonary capacity, medication dependencies, recovery time after exertion. Immunization history became a field. So did exposure tolerance, heat, noise, confined spaces. A supervisor called it cot math. Who can go 12 hours when the diesel runs thin? Someone else called it a quiet eugenics pressure. Both were staring at the same columns. Then came soft screens dressed as performance. Startle response, decision speed under noise, sleep debt resilience, confined space tolerance. Not tests for goodness, tests for friction inside a plan that can lock. A contractor described it as polygraph adjacent. No needles, same stomach drop when the questions probed refusal. Have you ever declined an order in an emergency? No context. No room for a story about refusing a bad call. Immunogenetics poked its head through a research door. Not destiny, markers for disease risk post-crisis, vaccine responsiveness, cross-protection profiles. The defense stayed clinical, protect the cohort. The objection landed heavier. you're pruning the cohort. A memo warned of bottleneck risk. Optimize for efficiency, and you raise extinction risk through homogeneity. Diversity isn't virtue, it's resilience. The reply said convoy discipline beats scattered excellence. The algorithm tightened. Micro-stories showed the weight. A water plant foreman was told to submit 6 names for continuity cadre and keep the rest trained but uncredentialed. He stood at a whiteboard and did the brutal arithmetic: marriages, asthma inhalers, bench knowledge, the quiet mechanic who could listen to a pump and hear a bearing whisper. He picked 6. He didn't sleep. In the hallway, he passed the 7th, hands cracked from chlorine, a picture of 2 kids taped inside a locker, and knew what the word expectant means when it's turned into a gate. A trauma nurse with pediatric specialization competed in the Matrix against a logistics generalist who could drive stick, fix a generator, and run a warehouse. The model weighted the generalist higher under sustained operations. The nurse's manager appealed. The appeal died under a toggle labeled SO_mode. In that mode, children became throughput, not names. Families don't read toggles. They read a closed door. Sealed manifests stopped being paper. They became dynamic sets, lists that update when a badge scans. A rail operator fielded handhelds keyed to mission fit. Yard gates unlocked for green badges and stalled on yellows. A health system's new printers encoded triage priority and movement permissions in a strip of color that opened doors when the grid blinked. None of it illegal. All of it directional. People on the wrong side stare at plexiglass and watch water sit 10 feet away. The parallels haunted history people in the room. Lifeboat ethics. How many before the hull dips? Wartime triage. Immediate, delayed, expectant. In hospitals, expectant means comfort when resources can't save. In corridors, expectant becomes a rule that never says its name. A medic argued pretending keeps you human long enough to find another bus. A planner pointed at the clock. Somewhere between them, a mother holds a child and hears staging area without shade. There was a fix on the table that spreadsheets hated first and learned to like: decentralize. Many thin ladders instead of one thick spine. Seed microshelters, schools, churches, clinics, with water, air, daylight, battery banks. Publish criteria and training paths. Early runs looked messy: leakage, gaming, crowd noise. Second pass priors showed survival diversity up, panic decay faster, medium-term recovery stronger. Command lost clarity. Neighborhoods gained agency. The algorithm sulked, then started to smile when the curve steadied. Reframe the objective function. Optimize for survival diversity, not throughput purity. Weight neighbor effects: who stabilizes a block, who teaches, who multiplies skills. Score potential, not just present clearance. Reward mentoring trees that grow redundancy. Penalize brittle quartets, where losing one body collapses a function. Build rosters that expand under stress. A ladder people can climb into usefulness when capacity appears. Change the defaults around gates. Replace manifest integrity as a body filter with integrity as transparency. Publish criteria now. Post-appeal windows. Auto-expand lists when indicators ease. Replace flow denial with release at pinch. Add exits before barriers. Force every closure to carry a timer, a reason, and a reopen trigger tied to conditions, not moods. Measure leaders on safe releases, not perimeter stability minutes. We tested those swaps in 2 places that dared to be noisy. A western state funded microshelters across rural schools, required public opening criteria, and drilled parallel gates at known choke points. Throughput dipped for 10 minutes, then panic decayed. A Midwestern metro posted triage ladders that included neighbor effects and training paths. The first drill saw gaming. The second saw mentoring. The third saw fewer red faces at the fence. The algorithm can learn that ethic if someone tells it to. Right now, it rewards silence and purity. It can be rewritten to reward breath. That means procurement that asks whether hardware opens first. It means oversight that counts minutes closed and releases made. It means HR that treats continuity fitness as a training path, not a predestination. The planet will keep throwing noise at timing signals and lines. The models will keep updating. None of that requires sealed manifests. Heuristics set questions. Evidence sets thresholds. Ethics set limits. The scoring engine isn't evil. It's a mirror. If we feed it floors, it will defend them. If we feed it ladders, it will build them. Because the last defense against selection policy dressed as safety isn't a footnote in a doctrine. It's a default in software and concrete. Widen at pinch. Publish ladders. Count releases. Teach the system to exhale when the timer starts. And when someone reaches the fence with a child in their arms, make sure the Doctrine remembers the point. Let them through before the timer hits 8. Decoding Cull. Semantics, context, and the viewer's last letter. Cull wasn't a banner on the sketch. It hid in a margin beside a tight loop and arrow glyph the viewer had used for years whenever crowds pressed into a narrow exit. In their field shorthand, that loop meant relieve pressure. Widen here, add a second gate, release at the pinch so bodies don't crush. They borrowed the ecology verb for a bottleneck, not for people. Call pressure at pinch, they wrote, clumsy phrasing that should have stayed a note to self. In a Doctrine room tuned for control, the ambiguity took on weight it was never meant to carry. The page where it lives shows a funnel from coast to ridge, arrows thickening, a ridge road narrowing flow. The glyph sits like a hinge, tight loop, arrow through, then the parenthetical, herd movement cull. In the viewer's notebooks, early uses pair the symbol with parallel egress and add lane. The intent was mechanical, prune the jam, not the people. But etymology is a trap. Ranch talk uses cull as sort out, often remove. A planning slide stripped the context and the glyph, kept the noun, and let the worst meaning ride. The word started to launder itself. In analysis training, cull pressure became prune at pinch. In operations drafts, culling turned into culling function, then disappeared under cleaner nouns. Flow shaping, flow denial, gate discipline. The practice drifted while the warning drained out. By the time a tabletop documented flow denial successful at fragility point, you could feel how a marginal verb had become a switch you could flip without speaking the old meaning out loud. The viewer tried to tackle it with ink. Their last letter is meticulous, small block print, a steady hand clinging to precision. I meant prune, not burn, they wrote. Cull pressure equals widen exit. Add parallel gates at known choke points. 2-gate posture halves. Crush risk, even if throughput dips briefly. They drew the loop and arrow in the corner and slashed through it, a visual plea. Don't turn this into a blade. They added one more line that felt like a bridge to the operator's world. Release at pinch before perimeter hardening. We can place the letter. A program manager's inbox logged receipt, date stamped after the clinic's panic-like event, and before the April Hinge tabletop. The routing note reads, viewpoint addendum, non-standard. A scan surfaced later in a draft with a bracketed footnote. Author intent, hazard, not instruction, and a red comment bubble. Remove, confusing. The edit won. The footnote vanished. The noun kept walking. Semantics matter because they set defaults when rooms go loud. Cull framed as warning makes hands reach for a second gate. Cull reframed as function makes hands reach for hardware that narrows. The interpreter tried to smuggle the original sense back in with different words. Release at pinch in one region's guide. Timers on closures. Auto-reopen triggers tied to conditions, not moods. In the national doctrine, the humane phrase flattened to dynamic perimeter management, a term elastic enough to bend either way under stress. A micro-story shows how elasticity breaks people. A Ridgefoot cloverleaf drill stacked cars in heat. The facilitator called cull pressure. Half the room moved cones to add an exit. Half rolled a barrier truck. In the scramble, the staging area became a shoulder with no shade. After action, flow denial effective, perimeter stable. The line that could have read, releases at pinch prevented crush, never got written. The minute taker captured the success measure the hardware rewarded. The viewer's letter tried one more tactic, math. They cited crowd models from stadium evacuations, showing that adding exits reduces fatalities, even when immediate throughput dips. They underlined that throughput recovers as panic decays. They drew a small ladder under the glyph and wrote, ladders over floors. The phrase traveled as rumor before it ever saw a slide. In one operator's notebook, a margin note reads, swap floor for ladder equals criteria widen under stress. In procurement, doors arrived that could swing wide. In practice, the default still favored hold. Evidence status stays honest. We can verify the letter, the receipt, the draft footnote killed an edit. We can't prove the addendum-bound operations. We can show how language drifted across versions. Rescue to stability, release to discipline, cull as warning to denial as function. In bureaucracies, that's the difference between a caution and a rule. So fix the rule with plain speech that resists drift. Retire cull from doctrine. Write the practice, release at pinch. Add parallel gates at predictable choke points. Post criteria now, with expansion triggers tied to heat, air, and load, not internal lists. Force every closure to carry a reason, a timer, and an auto-reopen. Count minutes closed and releases made in every after action. Make manifest transparency, the integrity that matters, why a door opens, not who it shuts. Because semantics aren't decoration in crisis rooms, they're muscle memory. If the noun on the wall says denial, denial becomes the reflex. If the noun says release, release becomes the drill. The viewer's last letter wasn't mysticism. It was operations written in human. Widen at pinch, ladders over floors. Keep the warning in the margin, not the knife in the legend. The revelation, what the map demands versus what we become. The reveal isn't a twist, it's a mirror. The extinction risk isn't a cliff we fall from in a day. It's a squeeze that hardens into habit, budgets drifting inland, gates learning to hold, algorithms deciding who looks like capacity. The map demands a spine. The question is whether we let that spine write our character before the sirens ever start. A corridor sounds merciful from altitude. Preserve knowledge, protect care, keep a quorum alive long enough to restart. But a corridor is also a sieve. It screens not only bodies but behaviors. Agencies start hiring for continuity fitness. Cities zone for population flow. Hospitals encode movement permissions on badges. By the time a threshold blinks, we've pre-decided who belongs, and that choice hides inside procurement codes and neutral nouns. The interpreter tried to draw a line you can live with when the pressure hits. Heuristics ask questions. Evidence sets thresholds. Ethics set limits. The map can sit in a binder labeled provisional until orthodox dials push drills deeper. But ethics need concrete. They have to show up as defaults. Release at pinch before perimeter. Timers and reasons on every closure. Criteria posted with ladders that widen under stress. If those aren't built into doors and software, the first hot hour writes policy for you. Here's the fork planners don't put on slides. You can centralize safety, few hardened nodes, thick spines, sealed manifests. That promise order. Or you can decentralize mercy, distributed microshelters, many thin ladders, posted criteria that let people climb into usefulness when capacity appears. Centralization looks clean and strong, right up until a node fails and takes a city with it. Decentralization looks messy and leaky, right up until a neighborhood exhale stops a crush without a command truck in sight. There's a quieter cost hiding inside the word floor. A survivability floor sounds pragmatic. It keeps rooms from promising the impossible. But floors become targets. Targets become ceilings. Ceiling logic convinces decent people to defend a number instead of a neighbor. That's how moral injury compounds, interest on every therefore. Replace the floor with ladders. Make leadership prove how they widen criteria when heat rises or air goes bad. Force doctrine to breathe. We know what the planet is actually asking for. Not obedience to a psychic sketch. Resilience in a noisy decade. Hardened comms, spare transformers staged inland, paper navigation drills, redundancy across transport modes, cooling and air in public buildings, backup water that doesn't depend on one pump. None of that requires sealed manifests. All of it collapses if gates default closed. Communities don't have to wait for a national doctrine to pivot. Local levers are real. Require open-first hardware and procurement specs. Mandate posted thresholds tied to heat and air indices, not internal dashboards. Write sunset clauses with teeth into any geophysical emergency authority. Demand after-action numbers. Minutes closed, releases made, appeals granted, second gates opened. Fund school and church microshelters for water, ventilation, battery banks, daylight. Resilience that can't double as a fort without a public vote. The corridor can also change what it counts as value. Score neighbor effects. The bus driver who knows every side street. The apartment manager who can stabilize a block. The teenager who can run a generator and translate for a floor of elders. Wait mentoring trees that multiply capacity in the middle of a week you can't staff. Train for ladder building, not gate polishing. Make sure the algorithm sees more than pulse ox and forklift skills. We tested the swaps where people were willing to tolerate noise. Parallel gates at known choke points. Two-lane release drills before any barrier drills. Criteria laminated and zip-tied to fences. Auxiliary rosters that auto-activate when a humidity index crosses a band. Throughput dipped for minutes. Panic decayed. Officers learned to hear appeals without losing the perimeter, because the perimeter wasn't the prize. The safe release was. Publish what you're optimizing for. If your dashboard says perimeter stability minutes, you'll get calm gates and hot crowds. If it says safe releases, reopen lanes, appeal grants under stress, you'll get officers who reach for second exits first. Success metrics are ethics with numbers. That's how you make ladders over floors, more than a speech. The harder truth is cultural. We've been practicing triage for a decade without calling it that. Supply chains trimmed to perfection. Hospitals run at the edge of surge, just-in-time everything. The corridor inherits that reflex unless we interrupt it. Redundancy will look like waste until the week it saves strangers. Transparency will look like risk until the day rumor does worse. You build the habit now, or you won't have it when the timer starts. Bring the viewer back for one sentence. Prune, not burn. They meant release at pinch. The interpreter wrote ladders into margins until the pen dug grooves. Both were asking for the same thing, defaults that keep humans visible when math demands purity. The corridor isn't evil. It's a machine. Set it to breathe. Or it will learn to hold its breath and call that survival. The open file, what remains unproven, and urgently relevant documents verified, motives inferred. Publish criteria now. Demand thresholds, sunsets, ladders. Retire Cull. Write release at pinch. Tie every closure to a timer and a reason. Count the releases. Survival without ethics is failure disguised as planning. If independent systems are already aligning, set humane defaults now. Ask your city for posted criteria, timers on gates, and microshelters with water, air, and light. Comment, open the file, your city, and tag 2 officials who can put ladders into the budget this quarter. The map is already being built. Make sure it breathes.